Hello to you out there in the dark, my little sliver of warmth in this cold place. You help me keep my sanity. I mean it, friend. What else is there here for me but boredom? Boredom as endless as that black sea roiling just beyond these walls. Boredom. And fancies. The mind can wander in a place like this. You can see too much meaning in the way the shadows dance in the torchlight. In the shapes. Faces? Pressing against the curtains? Enough of that thinking. I'm safe here. No matter what's happened to my world. Vul. Oh, but I remember when it was named Vulama, and, farther back still, Vulameshi. Vulameshi. Meshi means new home, in a tongue turned to dust by time. Well, now I am left with nothing but my thoughts. Alone here in this place. In spirit, at least. I've wondered much on where to start. How to tell you of Vul, that beautiful world I see from here. Its vast history spread before me like fish jelly across dark, steaming black bread. Its beginning and its end. Where to start? Far back in its history, I think. At the edge of an epoch, a great change that would shatter it completely. At the heart of that world, that time. At Rham Sek, the great city ruled by the God King Rhamashular. What is a Sek? Well, let me paint a scene. The old, worn wood of a riverboat creaks beneath your feet as it floats around another of the endless, wide bends in the river Woet. Above you, the evening sky stretches from the high reeds of one bank to the other, its deep purples reflected in the mirror-smooth water. The air is thick with heat, the stink of swamp, and the buzz of insects. The only other noise is the rhythmic dip of the long pull the bowman plunges into the river, searching for snags, and the occasional splash of something large slipping into the water from the river's shore. Each time you hear this last, you think of the long-toothed grin lizards you saw basking on muddy banks the day before. Each one as long as the bowman's pull, skin a scaly rough fire of violets, greens, and oranges. Around you, the other travelers are quiet, wide-eyed as they peer around at the evening light, knowing they are close to their destination, Rham Sek, the great city of the swamp, Rham Sek, proudest of all Seks. Cries pierce the evening as a flock of white marsh birds lift from behind tall reeds to the east, wheeling into the distance above the tops of far-off vine trees before disappearing into the approaching twilight. You wipe sweat from your brow. The air is so lousy with damp you wonder how any of you can stand it, how the hard, pale wood below you hasn't rotted into nothing, eaten through by the fat white river lice scattering across it. As you kick at these, watching them jump and scatter among the other debris, just as the near silence of the boat finds you again, the craft slips around a bend and a gasp rises from those around you. Rham Sek, its towering ancient black walls emerge from the evening fog, circling the temple at its center, a shadowy mountain lit by the last red rays of the setting sun. It's the largest city you've seen, the tallest walls. Even the cities of the Tuk people to the northwest, known for their great castles, or the vast ports of the Rolish merchants, are nothing to compare this to. Rham Sek is an impossibility, you think. How could such a monstrosity not sink into the mud? Magic, comes the answer. That of the Elukadi, the high mages, surely, or perhaps that of Rhamashular. Your gut drops. To even think his name so close to Rham Sek, you clear your mind. Flashbugs dance across distant fields, green wisps in the dark floating above muddy pools dotting the land surrounding the city, emptied as they are of grass and trees. Such an oddity, the city's placement. What audacity to build it here, what defiance of the whims of the world itself. And to think, you've heard tunnels, dungeons, and other secret places stretch as far below it as the temple reaches above, all refusing to flood, as if the water itself fears Ramesh. You catch your wayward thoughts. Ahead, the wide span of the Marcher's Bridge creeps into view, another impossibility. Nearly as tall as the walls of the city, so long its beginning and end are lost beyond the banks of the river. Its top, far above, is adorned with tight crenellations and towers whose dim arrow slits and murder holes peer accusingly down at the waters of the Woet. Around the bridge are the river wharfs, lines of ships tied to docks that lay like dried tongues across the water. Up the shore are crowded wooden warehouses and merchant offices, one of which is your destination. Past these, you can even make out the bobbing torches of a procession along the red road, slowly moving towards Rham Sek from the direction of the pens. Locals on their way home from fishing, you hope, or soldiers even. But grimly, you wonder. You wonder and watch them pass, fires floating like spirits in the dimness of approaching night. Yes, this is a good place to start. Rham Sek, seat of Rhamashular. Rhamashular. Let me follow an ancient custom. Rhamashular. I spit to curse the ground for letting such a creature walk atop it, and to remind my tongue of the taste of bitter hate. Rhamashular, the tyrant of the temple, whose hands are soaked through with blood as deep as the night sky. Rham, the ageless, cruel, and clever. Rham, the God Mage, for this land has not seen the likes of his power before or since. He towers, head and shoulder over the tallest Grook, arms and legs thick with muscle, torso wide and hard. His long black hair and wiry beard tamed into tight braids capped with silver. His bronze-colored skin smooth and taut. His seat of power, the temple city of Rham Sek, is perched on the edge of the Skarshe swamps on the east bank of the river Woet, which flows down from the Claith Mountains until it reaches the shallow sea. By another name, the river is known as the Road to the Sek, a busy river, thick with travelers, merchants, and those who wish to be tested for entrance into the colleges of magic. Others reach Rham Sek from the shallow sea, taking passage upriver from one of the smaller port cities, while still others land at the great port of the Pens and follow the red road across its many bridges. Still, some approach by land from the north and northeast, though the paths through the swamp are said to shift and change. For a price, guides, usually of the local Mar people, can be hired to navigate these dangerous places, and often fortune-seeking caravans make the journey down the river Thun to the east, then risk the path overland to save a few days' time. Upon reaching the city's black walls, made from stone mined in the far-off Claith Mountains, a traveler might enter through one of its many gates, the greatest being the Red Gate, a gaping maw pointed westward toward the Pens. Through that mouth flows the stone-paved red road, wide enough to accommodate a dozen wagons driven aside one another, wheel to wheel. The red road, said to consist of 1,000 bridges as it snakes its way from the Pens across the great swamps to the Red Gate of the Sek. Though, it does not stop there. Past the Red Gate, it takes a straight path through the city, under gate after gate, past the inner and temple walls, until it ends at the grounds of the temple, the great artery of the Sek, I've heard it called. For along its path have marched an endless procession of slaves and condemned souls to the horrors at the heart of the Sek. And it is said, the Pens are never empty, and the red road never rests. But I get ahead of myself, back to the Red Gate. Beyond the guardhouses and iron teeth of the gates, a buzzing wall of peoples greet travelers, stretching down thoroughfares that break to the left and right of the red road. There are tight groups of tall, wide-nosed, broad-backed Grook who have traveled far from their homes in the northeast to trade, their large, deep-holed ships no doubt harbored at the pens. Dark-skinned Elkai from the Krekol plains in colorful, flowing silks lead their sweat-soaked steeds to stables within the outer ring of the city. Tall, black-haired Tukmen from the northwest eye these with dour looks, old hatreds burning deep in their eyes, though none would break the peace of Rham Sek. Merchant wagons showing the house emblems of traders from ruralish cities rattle as they roll down cobblestone roads smoothed flat by time and traffic. Here, the cresting saberfish of House Bolmi silver on blue water. There, the golden bees of House Tamil fly across hills filled with purple flowers. There are even the long, pale braided beards of the Tuskmen, each wearing the strange, amber-colored, insect-like armors unique to their far-off lands, though they keep to themselves, moving quickly through the crowds. Then there are the free men and women of Rham Sek itself, high-born and low, coming and going from the tangle of wooden homes built back off the thoroughfare, far behind the swinging signs of taverns and inns, the large stone trade houses, the guilds, the merchants, tack shops, fishmongers, and butchers. These are mostly Mar, short, brown-skinned, thick-limbed peoples with dark clothes and floppy-brimmed hats pulled low. Here and there, head and shoulders of all but the Gruk, are the slim figures of the pure-blood Nahemesh with their black hair and bronze-colored skin. Ram's people, few though there are, fewer still outside the sects. Then there are the half-blood Nahemesh, most mixed with Mar blood, going about their business under the hateful glances of all. This scene stretches far to the left and right, spanning the outer ring of the city, situated between the tall black rock of the outer wall to the inner wall, the edges which pen this part of the city. And if you were to follow this circle around the Sek, you'd find the crowds thin and thicken. You'd find side roads running off to back alleys and body houses well hidden from view. You'd find rough places and rougher faces, residences filled with laborers and the free servants of low and high mages, brick bathhouses thick with smoke and history, ancient, wide, dusty plazas where old men sit and doze during the hottest part of the day, decaying shrines to near-forgotten Mar gods, jails and executioners' blocks, storm drains, and thick, iron sewer grates. But back near the Red Gate, dirty children and mongrel dogs dart between the legs of men and women lost to the city's flow. Loud barkers stand atop barrels, vying for the attention of those with a few chets in their pocket, while wagon drivers shout and whip their teams through the throng. Look hard into the faces of these people, even the Nahemesh. Notice the twitch at the sides of their eyes, the wariness. Smiles seem taut, even among the children. It's a feeling in the air, a thickness beyond the humidity, and it is one that has been here for as long as the Sek has stood, before any of those who feel it now were born, and it shall persist beyond their deaths. For always in the Sek are the cries of the chattel, brought as they are from the pens, the harbor city where they are collected and kept until the long march down the red road brings them to their fate. Men, women, children. As far as Rhamashular can stretch his fist, these are collected, fates sealed. For Ram and the Elukadi, the high mages, practice blood magic, and their need has ever grown for as long as Rhamashular has ruled the Sek. And he has always ruled the Sek. None living, other than Sushyana, can recall a time when he had not ruled from the great city of the swamp. Immortal are the rulers of the Seks in the eyes of the people of Vol. Volameshi to Ram and Sushyana. Sushyana atop her tower. We'll speak of her and her Sek later. Today, we speak of Ram and his. Continue into the city, and you will pass a second wall, not as tall as the outer wall, but twice as thick. Atop it march patrols of Rham's soldiers across cracked, ancient bricks. In dark mail and gray cloaks, they carry the crimson banner of the Sek among forests of long spears whose tips glisten in the sun. The banner snakes and snaps in the wind, adorned with a black nine-pointed star, the symbol of Rham Sek, a strange star, 2 of its points longer than the rest, or perhaps the rest are dimmed. Past this wall lies the inner city, a place restricted to all but Elukadi, the high mages, and Julukadi, the low mages, their servants and slaves, and those aspiring to learn enough of the magical arts to be called a mage themselves. Within are curving cobblestone roads that twist around well-kept gardens, arboretums, fountains, manor houses, and buildings housing the colleges of magic. Tall structures with smooth walls and arched doorways, stunning riads, libraries, apartments, and dormitories, each built of stone bleached white by sun and time. Here also are the executioner blocks and, of note, the Hall of the Tested, where the bodies of would-be mages who were tested and failed are kept, preserved in their final moments by some magic of the high mages, so that each new aspirant can be marched beneath their bare, pale feet before being tested themselves. On warm evenings, when the southeastern winds blow in from the shallow sea, it is said you can hear the rustle and creak of 1,000 nooses mixed with the sighs of the failed mages as their bodies twist and sway. The manor houses and mansions of this area are reserved for the Elukadi, few as there are to earn that title, though in Rham Sek you might find a dozen of them living at a time, something unheard of anywhere else in Vol, even in Sushyana. Of the low mages, the Julukadi, there are many more, though their abodes are not afforded with as much opulence as the high mages. These live in ancient cramped apartments that grow hot during the height of the sun, that trap the heat and humidity even during the night. And what magic is taught in these time-worn halls? The only Rham allows, blood magic. True, other magics are practiced in far-off groves, in the smoky huts of village witches, on the seas upon boats far from the continent, deep in the shadows of the jungles to the southeast, or on the cracked wastelands of the Tuskmen, but these are practiced in secret, or far from Rham's reach. For he offers a hand to any, if only they would come to the Sek to be taught his ways, to be tested. Those who refuse and are caught are put to death, and in the long history of Vol, Rham has fought wars to silence renegade peoples who would not stop their practices. For Rham teaches all that the power that drives magic must come from something one can see, can weigh, can count. It cannot be drawn from the ether, from the world around you, but it absolutely must come from one's own blood, or the blood of another. He calls all other magic a great sin, a heresy against the order of the universe. And so, as far as he can project his power, this truth is carried above all others. The audacity of the man. What a great joke. But, nonetheless, great power can be and was wielded using blood magic, from the smallest spark of heat created from a mere drop of blood, to great conflagrations requiring the bleeding of 100 thralls. Of course, then there is the ritual of renewal, a great sacrifice of slaves upon the temple yards on the 1st of Tavaria, the day marking the start of a new calendar, an event preceded by months of blood hunts, some even led by Rham himself. These see the pens swelled to bursting with unfortunates, fuel for a mass sacrifice. So let us move from the inner city to the temple grounds themselves with a passage from a book written by a favorite of mine. May his soul find peace.
I watched, afforded as I was by my position among the aspirants of the colleges, from one of the high seats overlooking the temple grounds. Around me were the low mages, the Julukadi, here to observe the ritual, envy burning in their eyes as bright as the torches ringing the field. Above us, seated at a higher level, were the high mages, the Elukadi, collected from every corner of Vul, their great ruts manned only by soldiers. There was Eva, the Black Tooth, the Tukman Lane Fair Singer, Keel Adorani, Deaf Ears, and the Minosh with her crooked spear, Tongue Plucker. There were others which I did not recognize. They wore their ceremonial white robes and high square hats, each embroidered with golden script marking their ascension to Elukadi. At the far edge of the temple grounds, elevated above all others, sat Rhamashular and Sushyana in their thrones. Ram's face was stoic, hard as rock, his dark eyes quietly observing the fields below. Sushyana, next to him, shone with radiance and beauty like a star blinking in a winter sky, her white hair framing her oval face, her wide blue eyes piercing the evening, staring at nothing and everything all at once. Ah, but if the two of them were to wed, their offspring would be something to behold. They sat in front of Ram's temple, which rose, blacker than a night sky, its sloped walls forming a triangle with a flat top. I've heard Ram's great scaled mount lives atop that temple, but if so, I have not seen it come nor go, so I find this unlikely, for where would it sup, a creature of its size? From where I sat, the parade of unfortunates proceeded below me, greeted me with their sad stench, for it was a hot evening in the Sek. I watched them march, men, women, children, old and young, a solid line of soldiery to either side, down the red road, packed like slitherfish in a trap. At least 1,000, if I am not too mistaken, having counted how many marched through during an average minute, and dividing that against the time of the entire march. I kept time by the sinking of the red sun against the hot, humid sky. Black hells. How could they stand such heat? I barely could, even high above, where a faint breeze stirred. But they did, and with little complaint. I cannot say if it was normal, or if their stay at the pens had so thoroughly broke them, but rarely did I see even one of the chattels step out of line. Not that it would have done much good, with so many soldiers about. Ah, but in my mind I imagined I would fight, would wail against my captors until the last. But I suppose I am a fool. On the other hand, perhaps it was the cold, dark gaze of Rhamashular that kept them in check. Who can say? As the field filled, unseen musicians began to beat drums, clash cymbals, and blow horns. The song carried no melody, but rather some suggestion of exultation, of religious significance. And as the crying and murmuring of the chattel rose, so too did the music, mixing with them at first, before drowning them out. At times the music became so loud it was hard to even think, and I suspect it could be heard clearly, even so far as the outer city. If it bothered any other there, it was hard to say. The low mages around me were puffing their chests, intent on the crowd below. Above them, the faces of the high mages were as stone. The procession of slaves ended as night fell and the temple grounds were filled to bursting. More torches were lit, as well as fat braziers. Looking down at the shaved heads of so many gave me the impression of staring at the clumped pistils of the pale Burton flowers that bloomed so beautifully every spring in the bogs where I was born. The clang of the iron teeth of the temple gate against the red road caught my attention as it momentarily rose above the music. This sound was to seal the fates of those below. First Ram stood, then Sushyana, then the high mages. Ram held his long, heavy spear, Al-Huresh, up, then slammed its butt down. This rung out clearly for all to hear. He did this 3 times before he rose its tip toward the night sky. Even from the distance at which I sat, his height was impressive. Far taller than even the other Nahemesh among the mages. Far taller than even the Gruk, known for their height when they choose to straighten their backs. His voice bellowed out, louder still than everything else, chanting in a tongue with which I was then unfamiliar, one which sparked the curiosity in me that led me down the path I walk now, collecting these memories, these histories of Vulama, these truths long forgotten. Soon Sushyana joined in the chanting, her high voice a counter to Ram's deep baritone. Then the high mages began, while the low mages, deathly quiet, peered around excitedly. For most, I surmised, this may have been their first viewing of the ritual. As the chanting continued, I began to feel a thumping in my chest. First, I believed it was my heart, but it was slower, and it grew in intensity, as if unseen waves were crashing over me, growing larger and larger. This, coupled with a cold anxiety washing over my body, and my breathing intensified. I find it hard to explain still, this feeling. It was as if I was in the presence of something larger than myself, larger than the world around me, like some unseen predator of which I was only then aware, opened a hungry eye. I found it hard to stay seated, to not flee. Some of the low mages to my left and right began to fidget with their robes, sweat beading down their faces. It was then the crowd finally panicked. Their docile nature was gone in an instant as they began to roil, to climb atop one another, to try and escape over the tall walls of the temple grounds, trampling one another with abandon. They looked now like maggots atop the butcher's waist. This moment of panic lasted but a few seconds. Then there was a sound like a great sucking of air, a pulse of deep noise that turned my gut and nearly knocked me backwards. Then screaming, cries, the sound of 1,000 voices rising in fear and pain and confusion. And with them rose the music, that horrid cacophony, to drown them out. Now I understood its purpose. It is a miracle that I can remember any of it. When I looked again to the crowd, there was blood, a sea of it, washing the temple grounds crimson before rising in strands, some thin, some thick as a rope, up, until reaching the ring of high mages, Ram and Sushyana, where it flowed through them. They seemed to take the blood into themselves, to absorb and focus it. Their chanting never abated, it only grew in intensity. Then all reached skyward, hands raised as if in supplication, all except Ram. Instead, his spear was thrust high, as if he wished to gut the heavens themselves. There was another loud thrum, then the screaming stopped, all at once as if I had gone deaf. At the same moment, I witnessed the most miraculous thing I've seen then or since. In the sky above the temple, great holes in the night began to open, to tear open. I know, it makes little sense to you who did not see it, but let me explain. Imagine cloth, black, laid over your head, a sheet large enough to cover you completely. Now imagine, where you could see, perhaps right in front of your eyes, someone were to cut a hole in that sheet, so that you could see through it into the world again, so that light shone through it. Now, imagine that sheet were the night sky, and something, the magic it must have been, were to tear it open and reveal something beyond. Each of these holes, then, grew larger and larger, and through each light shone. Each one was a different scene. There were vistas into deserts covered in red sands with flaming mountains on the horizon. There were lush forests, cliffs and oceans, strange dead lands cracked and barren, thriving cities of peoples I have never seen, some even looking back at the hole, surprised, afraid, astonished. 9 holes altogether. I did not know then, as I do not know now, what they were. Perhaps they were lands of this world of which I have not heard. Some seem familiar, some did not. Or perhaps they were other places, other times. I cannot begin to fathom what they were, or why they were created. When I looked from them to Ram and Sushyana, another shock came. The two were searching, frantically, from one of these windows, these tears to another. Poise and disposition turned to what seemed to be panic. Rham called out then, over and over, his own name up toward these visions in the sky. But even as he did, they began to shrink. Slowly at first, but then faster, until they all, in perfect unison, blinked from existence. And all that was left was the black, star-strewed blanket of the night sky. Rham sat down then and raised a hand to his forehead. He slumped, but for a moment, and Sushyana rested a hand on his shoulder. A half-breath later, they were composed again, faces like statues. Such an oddity, that moment between them. Of all the things I witnessed that night, it was perhaps the second strangest, like a mountain cracked through, then a moment later intact again. Below me was a mad tangle of pale, lifeless bodies. Already other slaves were carting them away. Excerpt from Lifting the Veil, A Life Among False Gods, second volume of the Histories of Vulama, later named by Rhamashular, the heretical texts. And who was this author? One history knows him as the heretic, a man who died from a fever caught in the Scarshe. His histories banned by Rham, possession a capital offense. Yet despite this, its text survived generation after generation, copied again and again, though how unadulterated, who can say? Another history would know the author as Cutrix of Marrow, and his death, long and terrible, was delivered by Rham, personally. Such a fate for a man who began his scholarly journey with the intent of documenting the varied wines and spirits produced by the people of Vol. Far did he stray from that path. But, back to Rham Sek. Here our journey ends, friend, at the terminus of the Red Road. Here is the death-soaked temple grounds, a circular field surrounded on each side by high, ancient walls, atop which are benches and thrones, enough for all mages, high and low. Across the field from the temple gate is the temple itself, a towering pyramid with a flat top, the abode of Rhamashular. There is but one doorway visible upon its face, accessible through a wide stairwell behind large, sliding stone doors at the far end of the grounds, though one could also reach it from side passages and twisting stairs found flanking the temple gates. Along the smooth pyramid walls are other openings, wide windows that look out toward the shallow sea, the Claith Mountains, the Scarshe swamps, and great balconies pragmatic in their design. There are few attempts at beauty in Rham's temple palaces, instead only hard angles, smooth stone, tall open ceilings, and wide, empty hallways meant to direct an evening's breeze. A rug here, curtains to close against the morning sun there, a fountain for water, a few tables to eat and host guests, these last covered in dust. I can see Rham now, alone, his long shadow cast upon the temple walls from a far window, strolling those empty hallways in his thick, well-kept robes. His tall spear clicks against the dark stone beneath him, counting his long strides, echoing sharply through the temple, the man's mind lost to thoughts alien to most. Far below him, hidden from the city, a rumor to most but the Elukadi and a select few of the Julukadi, are a maze of tunnels leading to dungeons, deep oubliettes, torture rooms, and chambers of making. These last the most sinister, for within them men and beasts find their bodies bared to Rham's curiosities. Here is the place Rham experiments and creates. But we will explore this place at length later, for I've stumbled upon a few memories that will illuminate its horrors better than I can manage. Today I will leave you with a vision that floated up to me while I contemplated Rhamashular. A conversation spurred on by a few glasses of thick, sweet, poppleberry wine, between Dorrik Tam, guard captain of Rham Sek, and one of his subordinates who asked what laid beyond the temple doors. I've been in his meeting hall.
He entertains few beyond the petty sorcerers that rule over his lands in their walled ruts. But some important men and women do come from time to time. Why he meets with one and not others, I've no clue. His reasoning isn't meant to be understood by the likes of men like you and I. It's a long hall, and when entered you might be struck at how little adorns it. A few places to sit, dimly lit alcoves, a hard marble floor. So when a man enters, his eyes are drawn to a hanging at the far end of the room lit by torches. It's a pale thing, as tall as 2 men stood atop one another, and as wide as 6 laying head to foot. From that distance you think it perhaps yug-hide stitched together, or cured leather. I thought as much myself at first. But the moment Rham notices his guests have seen it, he takes them by the shoulder and leads them forward. I've seen it play out before, and each time it is the same, to a man. You can see these men and women puzzle it out as they approach. First, the images drawn upon it become clear, each a depiction of a great battle, with Rham stood victorious before his foes. In some, they are dead. In others, they are groveling at his feet, and each is separated, one from the other, by thick black stitching, like the lines on a map that mark one land from another. Closer still, his guests begin to realize from what skin it was made. And the drawings? Tattoos given before they were flayed from some poor wretch, likely the rulers of those conquered lands, stitched together to create the terrible thing. When Rham sees the realization in the eyes of these men and women, he steps forward and caresses the thing with those long, calloused fingers, sliding them across it like a lover's caress. And the hanging, at his touch, shivers and shakes like it was struck by a heavy wind. Then comes a moaning, a pitiful cry from mouths unseen. And his guests? They think it is some trick of Rham's magic, some illusion he is working upon the world to put them off their footing. But they know. By the stars and the dawn, they know.